For my audience research, I conducted a one-on-one interview with my primary and secondary audience. Here I made them watch my documentary and ancillary products. The purpose of doing an interview was to gain a more personal insight to the audience's opinion without the influence of others. I can then accurately analyse the feedback. I think it's appropriate to only focus on my target audiences, as I want to see whether the message of the documentary has been clear. I wrote 2 separate questionnaires that contain questions that give qualitative answers so the audience can expand on their thoughts. The primary audience of teenagers have questions across all 3 products that direct them to see if they can relate to the documentary, as they are the main audience. The secondary audience of parents and adults have questions that focus on their stereotypical opposing opinion to emojis. When asking my primary audience to identify the argument, most of them spoke about how it was between emojis versus the English language. What do you think the argument of the documentary was?
I would say the argument would be between whether emojis are replacing language or whether they're being used to guide it.
Whether using emojis kind of ruins the English language or not, or whether it actually helps it.
Other people identified the generational gap argument.
The argument of the documentary was whether emojis are good or bad for different age ranges, so for example children, and whether it will have negative effects on the children.
Are emojis used by the old people, or is it just young people?
I learnt that the multi-strand narrative is evident within my documentary, as people are getting different views on the argument of emojis. I then asked for their opinions after watching their documentary.
I think as time goes on, things change, so having emojis actually helps because it can take away from the serious tone of a message.
I think they are helpful. I mean, people tend to misinterpret it, so they are helpful at times, but it depends who you send it to, I guess.
My opinions on emojis, they're good, they're alright when they're with written text, but I don't think they'll ever be able to replace that because they're not that adapted.
On the other hand, the generational argument is evident with this audience, as they are not particularly fond with emojis.
Well, I don't approve of it. I think it's something they're just...
No!
I think it's something they're just for fun.
There is a negative stereotype that older people don't like advancing technology. By applying Stuart Hall's theory, this is an oppositional reading, where the audience completely disagrees with the argument that emojis can exist with language. I learnt that the stereotypes of the generational gap that I portrayed in my own documentary may actually be true in real life, and that adults tend to distrust emojis more than younger generations. Following on to this, I asked parents if they think it affects the way their child is learning.
I think emojis do affect the way children are learning. I think children normally, they adapt to reactions, and I think it's easier for them to understand facial emojis rather than maybe saying that someone's fine or saying that they're happy. There could be different ranges of happy, and I think emojis do show the range of excitement and emotion in children.
Yes, most definitely so. I think it shouldn't be put us into something that you need for everyday life, because it isn't. I think that's what the English language is there for. So emojis, keep it there for fun, i.e. on your mobile or your tablets, but not have it as the most important part of your day, whereas you can't do anything without sending someone an emoji.
A reoccurring problem that we learnt from the feedback was that the lack of expression in tone. Many felt like the voices weren't strong enough.
The male voice, it was quite monotone and it didn't really,
I felt it wasn't very clear what they were trying to say.
To improve, I think we need to change the voice of the narrator to someone who has more authority and dominance. Both primary and secondary audiences are quite active audiences. This is when the audience can make their own judgments and are aware about the power of the media. Many don't feel compelled to watch a documentary and actually don't want to consume the media. Overall, for my radio trailer, I learned that this product was not as effective in terms of persuasion. These uses of typical conventions were not as appealing audibly, and I think I could have changed the products by using conventions in a more creative way. However, I do think that the radio advert did well to create brand identity. Even the secondary audience seemed to understand what kind of brand identity it was building up.
I think the radio advert did clearly link to a documentary in the way that it used the emotions and emojis that would be typically used.
Yeah, so we had the BBC advertised, and then you talk about emojis, which obviously is some sort of brand as well, isn't it? So
Through mediation, the whole radio advert is quite intensive in perpetuating this idea of emojis and the generational gap, which is one of the arguments in my documentary. I learnt from audience feedback that the double-page spread was much more persuasive.
I feel that the language of the article is very good. For a parent, it speaks more on our level rather than the radio advert, which was just emoji lingo, which was very hard to decipher. Whereas this is very straightforward and it has more information on, so it's very easy to read.
language is fine. Yeah, I understood it.
By applying Katz's theory of uses and gratifications, which suggests that people seek out specific media to satisfy needs, our secondary audience finds it much easier to understand the article than the radio advert, as it is more educational, so they are able to acquire information and knowledge for their needs.
I like that it includes a lot of pictures, not just text, because just text can get a bit overwhelming and boring.
For our primary audience, most of them visually liked the double-page spread because it was appealing.
I liked how it included statistics about the use of emojis because it puts it into perspective. It's not just a couple of people who use it here and there, and also how it was laid out visually.
Yeah, the key quotes kind of drew me in.
This shows the binary opposite divide between the adults and teenagers. Whilst the adults enjoyed reading, the teenagers enjoyed the overall visual look of the double-page spread. There's a stereotype that adults are more mature and smarter, so they enjoy reading much more than teenagers, who are represented to like more colourful things that stand out. I wanted to see if I had chosen well in choosing the platforms for a documentary, so I asked both primary and secondary audiences if they could identify each company and explain if it fits well with the brand.
The documentary is associated with BBC One. The double-page spread is associated with Radio Times, and I'm not too sure what the radio advert was associated with. I could see the documentary being on BBC One and the double-page spread being in Radio Times, but I don't think the radio advert really fits in with the brand because it was quite confusing and it wasn't really as upbeat as the other two products.
The documentary was BBC One and then the poster was Radio Times. I think it does because when you listen to BBC Radio and stuff, they cover a wide range of sort of different topics. Like they range from stories to stuff like this, talking about how stuff can affect our language and how we speak in the future.
So with the radios, the BBC, and with the article, Radio Times. Yes, I do. Especially around it being a debate around emojis and something still quite fairly new in the industry. And I think it did fit quite well. Yeah.
The documentary and the double-page spread, I feel that it really fits in the BBC ethos because it's very informative, again, rather than trying to convince you of their own opinion. It's just there to inform you and to suggest some opinions, but both sides of opinions on emojis. I don't think the actual advert, BBC, the radio advert, conforms to the BBC conventions that much because it's not very informative. And if it was based on like CBBC, so directed at kids more to watch the documentary, then yeah, I think that's what it aimed. I mean, if that was the aim, that succeeded. But to a parent, I didn't understand the radio advert.
I think most of the audience were able to identify the companies that were in association. In terms of synergy, most people thought the products such as the documentary and the double page spread fit in with BBC and Radio Times, as it is informative just like the companies and you'd expect to see them there. However, I did learn that some people did have opposing opinions in terms of the radio advert because it seemed unlikely that a BBC documentary would have such an informal advert. So next time, to improve, I think I need to implement a more serious tone to the advert.